Kafka was an ugly, disgusting, lonely loser. He wanted to join the defense force to protect innocent people from the Kaiju's devastating attacks. But being a lazy ass like always, he failed the defense force test many times and ended up on a ground cleanup crew, working for the professional kaiju cleaning company Monster Sweeper. A kaiju appears in Yokohama. The city's emergency kaiju alert system activates, and the officials guide citizens to safe locations to escape the kaiju's wrath. All helicopters arrive and try to get the kaiju's attention by shooting it with weaponry. The locals discuss that the Defense Corps 3rd Division will exterminate the kaiju. Several 3rd Division members then arrive on the scene. The 3rd Division troops and their leader, Mina Ashiro, defeat the kaiju. This ugly fatso and his allies observe the kaiju's remains from afar. One of Kafka's allies tells him it's time to head to that kaiju's area to clean things up. After that, Mina and her allies walk down a pathway as many citizens praise them for their heroism. Eventually, Kafka arrives at the kaiju's location and performs his cleanup duties. The cleanup workers don't receive much praise, if any acknowledgement, unlike the 3rd Division troops. After Kafka gives someone a kaiju sample, he notices someone lifting a specific kaiju organ off the ground. Kafka tells his ally to stop, but it's too late. The organ bursts, and its acidic blood drops on Kafka's ally, causing him pain. Kafka heads to his ally and helps him recover from his flesh wound. He's unsure if he and his allies will finish things within a week. Then the supervisor informs Kafka that he must tackle and test in duty, and he isn't thrilled about it. Later, Kafka is lying in bed, unhappy that he had to perform and test in duty that day. Then the news broadcast on television catches his attention. The newscaster highlights Mina's achievements, and the flashback sequence involves a young Kafka and Mina. Kafka tells Mina that he wants her and him to exterminate all the kaiju. Kafka shuts his television off. He reflects on his current job and its value to himself and society. Kafka regroups with his co-workers in the morning. They introduce him to Reno and Kakala, a recruit who wants to join the defense force. Toku, the ally who introduced Reno to Kafka, tells Reno that Kafka had similar goals but quit. Reno confronts Kafka about it, and Kafka shares why he gave up on that dream. Reno says he doesn't plan to give up and departs to the changing room. Later, everyone arrives at the kaiju cleaning site. Their leader assigns them different duties. As for Kafka and Reno, the leader says they must handle the intestine duty. Although Kafka complains to the leader, he leaves to handle the task. The leader feels that this lazy fat ass would have been great in the defense force if he'd passed its test. At lunch, both Kafka and Reno struggle to eat, and Kafka gives vitamins to Reno and nose plugs to make the smell more tolerable. Later, Kafka's co-workers bid farewell to him and head home. After that, Reno arrives and thanks Kafka for his assistance. Before Reno departs, he tells Kafka that someone raised the Defense Force application's age requirements. He says many young people aren't interested in the job nowadays. Kafka thanks Reno for informing him. Before Reno leaves, a Yaju appears and attempts to eat him. Fortunately, Kafka saves Reno from Yaju. Kafka tells Reno to head home because he doesn't want Reno to perish and not fulfill his dream. He calls out to the Yaju, and a thrilling chase occurs between him and the beast. After Kafka jumps through a window, he has a flashback. In it, Kafka says a kaiju ruined their homes and their school. The two vow to exterminate the kaiju and join the defense force. Back in the present, Kafka tries fighting the Yaju, but the Yaju overpowers him. Before the beast eats Kafka, Reno arrives and saves Kafka. Kafka wonders why Reno didn't flee home. Reno says a Defense Corps member would never abandon someone in peril. Kafka reflects on his failures and screams. Before the Yaju hurts Reno, suddenly, several gunshots go off, resulting in the Yaju's demise. Kafka turns to the side and notices Mina nearby with her comrades. Mina orders two allies named Igarashi and Takaragi to look after Kafka and Reno. Later, we see Kafka reflecting on his encounter with Mina. He and Reno are currently in a hospital. Reno thanks Kafka for saving him and says he looked cool during their scuffle with the Yaju. He insists Kafka apply to the Defense Corps. Kafka thanks Reno for his encouraging words. Suddenly, a bug-like kaiju appears before Kafka and enters his mouth. Kafka experiences something strange, and Reno checks on him. Reno is startled by Kafka's kaiju-like appearance. Kafka reassures Reno that it's him and not a random kaiju. Suddenly, an old man stumbles upon Reno and Kafka. He plans to call the Defense Corps. Reno tells Kafka they should leave the hospital immediately. A flashback involving Mina and Kafka shows Kafka explaining why it's integral to tackle a kaiju's legs first. Mina tells Kafka that she's afraid of the thought of fighting a beast that's bigger than her. Kafka promises Mina he'll be by her side whenever she's afraid. Mina receives a call for a kaiju's appearance at the hospital and agrees to dispatch her team. Mina informs her 3rd Division comrades about the kaiju spotted at a hospital and why they must defeat it. Then, news about the kaiju is spread across Yokohama through alarms and news broadcasts. Back in the hospital, Kafka attempts to convince the old man that he's not a dangerous kaiju, but this fails. This convinces Kafka and Reno to leave the hospital to avoid further devastation on Kafka's part. One of Mina's troops informs Mina that the kaiju left the hospital. Reno contemplates what happened to Kafka during this time. While they run, Kafka starts some weird transformation, but then a mouth comes out of his mouth and eats a crow, making him return to normal monster form. The two reach a cordon before they head inside. Kafka stops and tells Reno that an enemy kaiju is nearby. Mina and her troops pick up on the new kaiju's tracks. Kafka tells Reno that this kaiju is the same one they fought back, so it's a Yaju. Reno suggests Kafka and himself hide at the cordon and let the defense force handle the Yaju. Elsewhere, the Yaju attempts to devour a little girl in front of her mother. Fortunately, Kafka arrives and knocks the creature across the city. Kafka and Reno help the child and her mother out, despite the child being terrified of Kafka's kaiju appearance. Kafka tells Reno to take care of the child and decides to punch the Yaju with all of his strength. And as he does, the Yaju explodes to pieces, causing a rain of blood. Kafka tells the child that Reno will take her and her mother to the hospital, and he will go away so that she won't be scared. As he turns, the child thanks him, causing Kafka to recall again his promise to Mina. Mina and her troops arrive minutes later, and she checks on the little girl. She promises the little girl that she will exterminate every kaiju. The little girl tells Mina not to hurt the good kaiju, confusing Mina. At Kafka's workplace, they all watch a news broadcast concerning the Defense Force's new code name for Kafka's kaiju form. They're calling Kafka's form Kaiju No.8. Reno enters the room and reflects on Kafka's situation. It's been 3 months since that incident, and he notes how Kafka is the first kaiju to escape the Defense Force's grasp. Suddenly, Reno's boss informs him that he and Kafka got mail. Reno opens his mail and learns that he's passed the first round of the Anti-Kaiju Defense Force selection tests. Reno departs. After that, Reno finds Kafka sitting on a dead kaiju and tells him he passed the selection test's first round. Also, he notices Kafka's in his kaiju form and scolds him for being in this state. A brief flashback shows what happened when Reno and Kafka returned to the hospital, after bidding farewell to the little girl and her mother. Kafka tells Reno that he always passes the first round, yet he notes that the second round is where he fails. Although Reno is concerned about Kafka's powers getting in the way, Kafka tells Reno that he'll take the exam. Nonetheless, Reno says Kafka should view him as a rival, and that he doesn't plan to aid him much regarding his kaiju ordeals. 10 days later, at the Nishitokayo testing site, Defense Forces Takakawa Base, Reno and Kafka arrive for the second stage examination. Kafka gives Reno insight into the base nearby, and a girl approaches Kafka. She asks Kafka to move his vehicle so she can park her car in his parking spot. Kafka refuses, so the girl uses her suit's power to give her the strength to pick the car up and place it somewhere else. The girl introduces herself as Kikaru Shinomiya. Kikoru wonders why Kafka Hibino reeks of kaiju, and Rino Ikakawa explains that they work at a kaiju disposal company. Kafka then goes and flips the van back. Kikoru is baffled by Kafka's strength and promises to outperform him during the anti-kaiju selection test's second phase. Kafka takes the fitness test portion of the selection test's second phase. Later, Rino explains that the second stage consists of two tests, fitness and aptitude. Since aptitude is a wild card and changes every year, they need to score points on the fitness test. Unfortunately, this worthless loser doesn't do well, especially in comparison to Kikoru. She teases him for his lackluster performance and departs. Meanwhile, Sashiro Hoshina gives Mina Ishiro the examinees list, guessing she isn't interested in them as she only cares about kaiju killing. But as she sees Kafka's file, she decides to listen to Sashiro, which surprises him. Sashiro then starts talking about the noteworthy candidates. Meanwhile, Rino also talks about them Haruichi Izumo, Haru Furuhashi, and Akagi Ragi and how prepared they are for this. Out of all the participants, Rino singles out Kikoru and says she's the one everyone is keeping an eye on. Kikoru approaches Kafka again, who is shocked that she is a big deal, but her butler quickly knocks him for touching her. She tells him that he made himself a fool again. Rino tells Kafka that the selection test's second phase involves kaiju cleanup duties, something Kafka specializes in. He tells Kafka what the judges will be scouting for during this selection test phase. Later, at the selection test area, Hoshina, the 3rd Division Vice Captain, explains how things will go. He says they must capture and exterminate the kaiju in the area, leaving Kafka and Rino speechless. Then, Hoshina navigates the participants to a new area. In it, he asks each participant to put on a Defense Force kaiju combat suit. Hoshina says these suits will massively multiply its wearer's combat power and will assist them in defeating the test area's kaiju. Among the participants, Kikoru has the highest combat power, while this disgusting fatso has the lowest. Hoshina leads everyone to the testing grounds. There, he gives everyone a breakdown of the battlefield, its monsters, and what he wants them to accomplish with the weapons and suits they've been supplied with. If their life is in danger, they will activate the suit's shield, but doing so will mean they had failed the exam. Then the test begins. Kikoru doesn't hesitate to showcase her excellent marksmanship and skills on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Kafka and Rino discuss Kafka's combat power briefly. Hoshina interrupts their discussion and lets them know that Rino will be monitoring everyone's progress. Although Kafka and Rino lack combat power, Kafka argues they should focus on supporting the ones that do. He feels this will impress the higher-ups who are monitoring them. Kafka and Rino arrive near a target and hide behind walls to avoid it. Kafka examines the Yaju and realizes he's worked on its species before. He throws a stun grenade near its eyes and tells the other participants to shoot its stomach because it's the monster's weak point. The men shoot at the monster's stomach and defeat it. They thank Kafka for his assistance, and Kafka and Rino flee the scene. While fleeing, Kafka argues he may have a shot at completing this test without using his kaiju abilities. Then, a Yaju appears and attacks Kafka. One of the 3rd Division workers states Kafka's vitals were significantly damaged during the exchange and feels he won't be able to continue fighting. As the Yaju prepares to kill him and Sashiro prepares to deploy his shield, Kikoru shoots the Yaju approaching Kafka. Kikoru says she doesn't like seeing fellow participants fail, yet this doesn't stop her from belittling Kafka again before departing. Kafka tries getting up but can't. Hoshina tells Kafka that he has fatal wounds, and Kafka wonders if it'd be in his best interest to give up. Although Hoshina recommends Kafka quit, Kafka gets up, and his combat power rises by a mere percentage. Kafka tells Hoshina that he doesn't plan to quit. Kafka gets on Rino's shoulders. Kikoru defeats the remaining monsters on the battlefield without Rino and Kafka's assistance. One of the exam personnel informs every participant that this exam stage has been completed. Back at the observation room, Mina and Hoshina acknowledge Kikoru's skills. Kikoru is the Defense Force General Director's daughter. On the battlefield, Kikoru hopes her performance is enough to impress her father. A lone monster arrives and attacks Kikoru. Kafka and the others notice the dead kaiju with Yaju restoring themselves nearby. Kikoru says she can still fight despite getting caught off guard by the random kaiju. The kaiju speaks, leaving Kikoru confused. The Chedi kaiju plans to let his Yaju companions fight Kikoru again. It then fires some strange projectiles at Kikoru, immobilizing her. Meanwhile, the exam personnel informs Hoshina and Mina about the strange events happening on the exam's testing grounds. Mina orders the activation of the recovery shields and sends the drones to the testing grounds. She orders Hoshina to visit the testing grounds with her. Meanwhile, Kikoru goes against the order and tries fighting one of the charged-up Yaju. The Yaju knocks her into a wall and continues progressing forward. A flashback shows one of Kikoru's friends, Risa, telling her that she's made it to the top of the Tokyo school acceptance list. Then, Risa's father arrives and praises her. Suddenly, Kikoru's butler arrives and tells Kikoru that her father will be satisfied with her results. Kikoru shares this news with her father, but her father tells her that she shouldn't celebrate this minor victory as she may fail next time. Her father argues she should set her sights on completing her next goal. Additionally, he wants Kikoru to become a perfect individual for humanity and her deceased mother's sake. The Yaju regenerates and gets stronger. Mina and Hoshina are worried they won't make it on time. Kikoru loses hope, and she even starts to apologize to her father in her head, as she is defenseless and about to get attacked by the kaiju. Kafka arrives, praises Kikoru for her hard work, and transforms into his kaiju form. Meanwhile, several examinees fight off Yaju and try to evacuate. A flashback shows Reno and Kafka. Someone informs them that the Hanju regenerated itself and is fighting Kikoru. Reno turns to Kafka and realizes he's vanished. Reno fears Kafka is going to transform to fight the Hanju and will get killed if someone spots him doing that. Kikoru is baffled by Kafka's transformation, and Kafka asks Kikoru not to tell the defense force about his ability. Meanwhile, Konomi informs Hoshina and Mina about the fortitude levels. She says they're experiencing a fortitude 9.8 level, and Hoshina says if that's the case, they may be dealing with one of the most powerful kaiju in history. Kafka does his best to fight his opponent. He thrusts himself to the ground. He then punches his opponent, which almost blows Kikoru away as Kafka destroys the kaiju. Although the kaiju is able to regenerate, Kafka knows that its powers won't allow it to heal from taking so much damage. The kaiju starts to regenerate but is unable to, making Kafka's speculations correct. But then, a beast appears from this kaiju, but Kafka easily defeats it. Kafka regroups with Kikoru and slightly returns to his human form. He praises Kikoru and tells her not to put herself in danger again. Reno finds Kafka and scolds him for revealing his powers. The two argue over the situation, and Kikoru faints. Later, Mina and Hoshina arrive to examine the Hanju's remains. Hoshina and Mina discuss what could have caused this dilemma. Mina orders her defense force allies to bring the investigation and disposal unit to the testing site. Meanwhile, Mina and Hoshina will defeat the remaining monsters. Later, Reno and Kafka chat about their recent kaiju hunting affair in one of the operation rooms. Mina eavesdrops on Kafka and Reno's discussion from afar. Suddenly, Mina confronts the two in their room. She thanks Kafka and Reno for recovering Kikoru and bringing her to the operating room. Before Kafka stops Mina from departing, he stops himself. He plans to confront her properly once he becomes an officer. Later, Hoshina visits Kikoru. Kikoru tells Hoshina that she defeated the Hanju, even though Kafka was the one who did that. Elsewhere, the chatty kaiju from earlier attempts to call his ally on his cell phone. His ally picks up, asking him about his current whereabouts. The chatty kaiju reverts to his human form. He exits the restroom and meets a few kaiju cleaners. Reno and Kafka's boss informs them that their new selection test results came in the mail. At the Defense Force's induction ceremony event, everyone praises one another for passing the selection tests. a participant named Iharu greets Reno and questions him about Kafka's results since he's not here. Before Reno responds, Mina enters the room and heads to the podium. Kikaru is asked to head to the main stage and speak on the participants' behalf. Mina thanks Kikaru for defeating the Hanju that was wreaking havoc. However, Kikaru feels bad because she knows Kafka is the one who defeated it. She questions why Kafka is not at the induction ceremony. Suddenly, Kafka enters the room, much to everyone's shock. In a flashback, Mina and other personnel discuss Kafka's results during the selection exam. Initially, Kafka scored the lowest during the test. Hoshina states that he wants to take Kafka in despite his low scores. He explains why and promises to make Kafka his cadet. Also, Hoshina offers to train Kafka. Mina informs the others about Kafka's status and shares an encouraging speech. Kafka interrupts Mina's speech, shocking many. Mina orders Kafka to give her 100 push-ups before departing. Meanwhile, Hoshina examines Kafka, sensing that something is off about him and planning to discover what makes him special. Later, Kafka, Reno, and Kikaru visit a restaurant. There, they discuss Kafka's kaiju origins and what he should do about his powers. Kikaru promises to keep Kafka's powers a secret. However, she warns that if he ever turns into an evil kaiju, she will exterminate him. Soon after, all participants engage in combat power training. Hoshina then instructs everyone to run several laps around the perimeter to finish their training for the day. After training, Kafka and the others fool around at the bathhouse. Meanwhile, Kikaru and other female troop members bump into Mina in the washroom. Kikaru contemplates Mina's build and questions her about her training. Mina tells Kikaru she is willing to fill her in on the details. Back in the bathhouse, the male defense force troops discuss their aspirations and reasons for wanting to become soldiers. Kafka shocks everyone by revealing that he and Mina were childhood friends. Later, Hoshina stumbles upon Kafka doing research. Hoshina informs Kafka that he knows what he said to the other troops in the bathhouse since everything in the facility is recorded. Kafka explains that he wants to fight alongside Mina. Hoshina interprets this as Kafka wanting to steal his vice captain role. He places the room's keys on a table and tells Kafka he has 2 hours to do his research before resting. Suddenly, an alarm goes off in the facility, and Hoshina tells Kafka to prepare for his first mission. Mina asks Okanogi for a status report on the Sagamihara location. Okanogi updates her on the evacuation efforts in the area. Mina discusses their ongoing Hanju problem with Hoshina, suggesting they defeat the Hanju at Sector Bravo to avoid further conflict. Meanwhile, Hoshina orders Kafka and the others to prepare for their first official kaiju hunting mission. Upon arrival at Sector E, Kafka is shocked by the Hanju's massive size. Hoshina briefs several groups on the situation, assigning them specific tasks. Kafka's team heads to their location to face the Yaju. Kikaru swiftly defeats most of the Yaju, impressing her co-workers, including Kafka. Meanwhile, Reno's team performs exceptionally well against their Yaju opponents. Reno impresses his rival, Iharu, with his round switch strategy. However, Reno believes he is still not strong enough and wants to improve so Kafka doesn't have to rely on his transformation. At Sector J, recruits are also performing well against the Yaju. The veteran troops, including Sector J's leader, Nakano Shima, are impressed by the recruits' actions. Okanogi updates everyone on the progress in several sectors, leaving Kafka feeling frustrated and upset about his own contributions. Determined to help, Kafka examines one of the defeated Yaju and locates its core. He contacts Hoshina and relays his findings, suggesting that weaker officers attack the Yaju from the sides and destroy their reproductive rear organs to prevent further spawning. Hoshina praises Kafka and instructs Okanogi to share Kafka's intel with the others. Meanwhile, Mina fires her large weapon at the Hanju. Hoshina tells Kafka to watch Mina closely. Mina defeats the Hanju in 3 shots, impressing everyone on the battlefield. However, she fires another round despite the Hanju already plummeting to the ground. Hoshina then approaches Kafka and demonstrates his exceptional close-range combat skills by swiftly slaying a Yaju. He explains his family's esteemed history of kaiju slaying and remarks that the captain and vice captain of the defense force receive weapons tailored to their fighting styles. Though the Hanju has been defeated, more Yaju begin emerging from its body. Okanogi warns Hoshina that the recruits are exhausted, but Hoshina insists this challenge will push them to greater heights. Elsewhere, Aiharu and Reno encounter a suspicious worker on the battlefield. They question him about his presence there. The worker admits that he was responsible for loading reproductive organs into most of the Yaju, but is furious that someone destroyed them. Meanwhile, Kafka's cleaner buddies observe the defense force's battle from a distance. They wonder where the new recruit is. Suddenly, the same recruit attacks Aiharu with a projectile before transforming into a kaiju. Reno and Aiharu immediately recognize it as the same kaiju that attacked Kikaru during the selection exam. The kaiju vows to capture one of them. Reno attempts to contact a platoon officer, but the signal is blocked. The enemy kaiju explains why before launching another attack at Reno. Reno narrowly avoids severe injury thanks to Kikaru's advice. Reno urges Aiharu to leave and call for backup. As Aiharu runs, he recalls Hoshina's words about surpassing one's combat power. He compares his stagnant growth to Reno's rapid development in the defense force. This realization convinces Aiharu to turn back and save Reno from the kaiju's new attack. The kaiju smugly reminds them that no one can escape this battlefield. It then lands a devastating blow on Reno, fatally wounding him. Meanwhile, Ikaruga informs Hoshina that they have lost contact with Aiharu and Reno. Kikaru rushes to Kafka and tells him that the same kaiju from the selection exam has returned. Elsewhere, the kaiju continues to torment Reno while Aiharu lies wounded nearby. Before the kaiju can deliver the final blow, Kafka arrives in his kaiju form and punches the kaiju's head off. Kafka places Reno in a safe spot while Reno, still conscious, feels frustrated for not being strong enough to prevent Kafka from transforming. The kaiju reattaches its head and tests one of its projectiles on Kafka. Seeing no effect, the kaiju decides to go all out to capture Kafka. In response, Kafka brutally beats the kaiju, leaving it in shock. He approaches the kaiju's body and notices its exposed core. Suddenly, several defense force troops spot Kafka and immediately aim their weapons at him. After Kikaru defeats one of the Yaju monsters, she recalls Kafka's plan for tracking Reno and Aiharu down. Kafka argues that he may be able to sense the kaiju's location. He then transforms and tells Kikaru to handle things from there. Word quickly spreads that Kaiju No. 8 is on the battlefield. Suddenly, the kaiju that Kafka seemingly pummeled regenerates, now possessing intel on how Kafka's powers work. The kaiju promises to kill Kafka next time and attempts to harm two defense force troops. Kafka protects them, and the kaiju vanishes. Kafka then flees and retreats to an alleyway, where Hoshina greets him. Hoshina announces to everyone that he has found Kaiju No. 8. Unleashing his combat power, Hoshina vows to exterminate Kaiju No. 8 and engages in battle with Kafka. Kafka is amazed by Hoshina's exceptional fighting skills. Meanwhile, Hoshina questions Kafka's fortitude level and wonders why this fight is bothering him. Fortunately, Kafka manages to deflect Hoshina's attack and escapes. Later, Hoshina reports to Mina and the others that Kaiju No. 8 has escaped. Kafka regroups with Kikaru minutes later and collapses. He apologizes for letting Kaiju No. 9 escape, but Kikaru tells him not to worry about either situation and suggests that he focus on himself more. Next, Mina confronts Hoshina about his battle with Kaiju No. 8. Hoshina tells her that the kaiju did not attack him and is not bloodthirsty like the others. Mina acknowledges this, but states that they will exterminate that kaiju another time. For now, she suggests that they focus on their current situation. Kikaru calls Mina and Hoshina to inform them that the kaiju that attacked Aiharu and Reno was the same humanoid kaiju from the selection exam. Meanwhile, Kaiju No. 9 wanders along a highway, where a bystander yells at him. In response, Kaiju number 9 devours the man, steals his vehicle, and drives away. While driving, he overhears a news broadcast about himself, which highlights his past actions and officially reveals his code name, Kaiju number 9. Iharu and Reno later arrive at a Defense Force troop party. Kafka explains that they are celebrating their first successful mission. To Kafka's confusion, many chefs arrive at the party with high-class meals because Haruichi organized the event. Everyone enjoys the celebration. Hoshina then tells Reno to observe everyone at the party, explaining that they are all mildly upset with their performance during the first mission and want to improve. Reno realizes that he is not the only one feeling down about his efforts, which makes him feel less discouraged. Afterward, Hoshina tells Kafka that he is being promoted to an officer role in the Defense Force due to his admirable feats during the first mission. Everyone congratulates Kafka. Later, Kafka visits Mina, who officially promotes him to an officer role. She tells him that it will take a while for him to fulfill his promise to her and informs him that she will be attending an HQ meeting to discuss Kaiju number 8 and 9. Before leaving, Mina instructs Kafka to handle paperwork with Hoshina and hopes that he can meet Hoshina's expectations. Kafka then visits one of the library areas to research, but notices Hoshina training in a small training area. Hoshina sees Kafka and explains that he is preparing a strategy to defeat Kaiju number 8 the next time they meet. Kafka vows to help Hoshina as much as possible, but Hoshina mocks him for his statement. Meanwhile, several wyvern kaiju fly through the air toward the city, led by a new humanoid kaiju who commands them to descend. As Hoshina researches Kaiju number 8 and reflects on what he knows about Kaiju number 9, Kafka worries about letting Hoshina down. Before heading to his bedroom to rest, several meteors crash down onto multiple bases. Hoshina relays this intel and immediately suits up, instructing all available Defense Force troops to take battle stations. He orders them to lure any kaiju away from the base and into the training area. During the battle, Kafka contacts Hoshina and points out that it is unusual for wyvern-type kaiju to travel in packs, as they typically travel alone. Hoshina turns and notices a sentient kaiju commanding the wyverns to complete an undisclosed goal. Akinogi informs Hoshina that the sentient kaiju has an extremely high fortitude level, classifying it as a Daikeiju level threat. Hoshina instructs Ikuruga to focus on fighting the Yaju. Before he can relay his full strategy, the Daikeiju launches an attack on him. As Hoshina fights the Daikeiju, Kafka tells Reno and the others to attack the wyverns from behind. However, everyone struggles against the wyvern's thick armor. Fortunately, Kikaru arrives with her battle axe and shatters a wyvern's armor, allowing her to destroy its core. A flashback reveals that, in the base's underground weapons storage room, Hoshina and Mina presented Kikaru with her battle axe, which was custom-made to fit her combat style. While such weapons are usually reserved for captains, Kikaru received one due to the increasing number of kaiju. Mina also declared Kikaru the third strongest on the base after herself and Hoshina. Back on the battlefield, Kikaru goes on a rampage, destroying the wyverns with her battle axe. When a wyvern catches her off guard, Reno steps in to protect her. Kikaru thanks him and acknowledges that they make a good team in defeating the wyverns. The others take note of their impressive teamwork. Meanwhile, Hoshina lures the Daikeiju to the training area. The Daikeiju enjoys the fight and plans to consume Hoshina to gain more power. However, Hoshina assures Akinogi that he is not worried and intends to go all out to defeat the Daikeiju in the training area. Elsewhere, Kafka rescues a Defense Force member named Minas from a wyvern attack. Reno and Kikaru arrive to fight the wyvern, with Kikaru instructing Kafka to evacuate the wounded while Reno tells him to trust his fellow officers. Akinogi then informs Kafka and the others that more high-ranking officers have joined the battle, each reporting their actions on the battlefield so far. Kafka and Mina's focus on helping the wounded. Back in the training grounds, Hoshina continues fighting the Daikeiju, impressing the beast with his combat skills. However, the Kaiju suddenly transforms into a larger variant of itself and emits a deadly toxin, shocking Hoshina. Fortunately, Hoshina has a mask prepared to protect himself from the toxin. With its new form, the Kaiju roars as its fortitude level reaches 9.0, as confirmed by Akinogi. The Kaiju then resumes its battle with Hoshina. Hoshina pushes himself to his maximum output, but Kaiju number 10 begins to overwhelm him. A flashback reveals a moment in which a man once told Hoshina that he should give up on joining the defense force. In the present, Hoshina assures his ally that he can still fight. However, he internally acknowledges that he has already lost his maximum release and does not know how to stop Kaiju number 10. Despite this disadvantage, Hoshina continues battling Kaiju number 10, leading to another set of flashbacks involving him and the mysterious gentleman. In them, he continues telling Hoshina to give up. He keeps bringing up Hoshina's incompatibility with guns and how Hoshina's exceptional swordsman skills won't do him any favors in this Kaiju era. Some time passes, and Hoshina decides to join the defense force. He thought he would be rejected, but Mina asks Hoshina to join the defense force, much to his surprise. She tells Hoshina she's not the best with swords, so Mina hopes she can count on Hoshina in the future. With this memory in mind, Hoshina gives Kaiju number 10 his best effort in the present. Kaiju number 10 overwhelms Hoshina further, encouraging Kafka to rush to Hoshina's aid. Before he does, Mina arrives and combats Kaiju number 10. During Mina's battle, Akinogi tells Mina where the Kaiju's core is. Meanwhile, Hoshina tries lending Mina a hand in wounding the Kaiju. Kikuru joins Hoshina seconds later to assist him in doing so. Unfortunately, Kikuru reaches her limit, yet others jump into the battle to support Mina and Hoshina. Mina hits the Kaiju from behind, exposing its core. She then unleashes her 96% combat power attack on Kaiju number 10 and claims victory for herself and her team. Everyone regroups after the battle. Several other troops tell Mina they plan to exterminate the remaining Yaju. Before they commence with that strategy, Kafka and the others notice something strange hovering over them. Okinogi tells them that the Yaju are coming together to create a Yaju-themed bomb. Left with no option, Kafka rushes in front of everyone and transforms into Kaiju number 8. Before Kafka attacks the Yaju bomb, he reflects on his current actions and is ready to face the consequences once he's finished his current task. Kafka leaps into the air and pushes the Yaju bomb into the sky. He plummets to the ground, and Mina tells everyone to ready their shields. The Yaju bomb explodes, eliminating a portion of the battlefield. After that, Kafka stands somewhere, and Mina and her troops confront him. Mina points a gun at Kafka and tells him she's taking him into custody. After Kafka is caught, Keiji, the Defense Force's deputy director, chats about Kafka with other personnel. They discuss several ideas on how they should use Kafka's Kaiju DNA. However, Isao, the Defense Force's Director General and Kikuru's father, insists they have the 3rd Division hand Kafka over to them. Kafka is currently imprisoned. While imprisoned, Kafka recalls Kikuru's words about what the Defense Force higher-ups use the numbered Kaiju for. Kikuru says if they capture Kafka, they'll likely turn his Kaiju number 8 parts into weapons. Mina, Hoshina, and several troops arrive to collect Kafka and bring him to headquarters. Kafka notices his friends standing on the sidelines and wonders if it's truly over for him. Before Kafka enters the aircraft, Reno steps out of line and tells Kafka that he knows he'll return to the Defense Force to fight by his side. Kafka realizes he's alone with Mina. Mina tells him no cameras are filming them in this area. Mina tells Kafka she's gathering evidence to prove Kafka is a human. Mina hopes this will save Kafka and informs him that no one in the 3rd Division views him negatively. Next, Mina asks Kafka to sit in a specific area. Mina informs Kafka that he'll be transferred to the area's maritime base. Kafka stops Mina and asks if he can still stand by her side. Mina says Kafka can. Kafka and Mina depart. Kafka gets contained at the area's maritime base. Several days pass. Aharu and the others reflect on Kafka's situation. Some want to save him, but another ally informs everyone that the Neutralization Bureau will decide Kafka's fate. Kikiru visits Isao in his office and asks him not to eliminate Kafka. Isao hands Kikiru a document containing Kafka's chest X-rays. Kikiru looks at the document and learns Kafka is growing a core, much like other kaiju she's fought. Isao argues Kafka is a kaiju and reminds Kikiru that a kaiju killed her mother. Before Kikiru leaves, she tells Isao that she still believes in Kafka. While Kafka undergoes more physical exams, Reno and the others report to Mina. Mina tells them they'll be temporarily transferring them to different divisions. She says they're doing this because the Takaka base was significantly damaged due to the respective numbered kaiju's rampage. Also, Mina says the higher-ups argue more attacks from other kaiju factions will occur. Therefore, Mina and the others will train the most talented rookies from all the divisions. Mina ensures them that this plan was in the works before Kafka's Kaiju No. 8 identity was unveiled. Reno complies, much to Aharu's shock. Later, Kaguragi meets with Haruichi on a rooftop. He tells Haruichi that he was trying to connect with someone who could help Kafka. He reminds Haruichi that he doesn't want to lose anyone, including Kafka. Afterwards, Isao meets with Kafka and asks one of the workers to release Kafka. Isao shoots Kafka and grabs him seconds later. He places remnants of Kafka's blood inside a tube. Isao doesn't view Kafka as human and says he'll remain a kaiju in his eyes. Kafka stands up and says he's not a kaiju. Isao has his men give him 2 mechanical arms. These arms were made from Kaiju No. 2 parts. Isao battles Kafka. Kafka chooses to partially transform into a kaiju. While he's battling Isao, Kaji shares some intel with Kikiru about Kaiju No. 2. He says the beast was a prideful one, but they conquered it and turned its body parts into weapons. He says Isao is the only one who can use those specific weapons. Before Isao delivers the final blow, Kafka fully transforms and blocks Isao's assault. However, Kikiru and the others realize something's off about Kafka. Kafka learns he's no longer in control of his body. Then, the small kaiju that infected Kafka chats with Kafka. He demands Kafka to kill Isao. Kikiru pleads with Kafka to prove that he's a human to Isao. Meanwhile, Reno and Aharu are at their base's gym. Reno tells Aharu he wants to get stronger so he can protect Kafka. He knows Kafka will return, and this encourages Aharu to train harder. Then, the platoon leaders arrive and inform Aharu and Reno that the higher-ups will determine Kafka's fate today. Moreover, they report that Mina was summoned to the Ariake maritime base and may return with splendid news. Mina arrives in a conference room, where someone tells her that Isao is examining Kafka in a different area. He tells Mina that she's only here as an observer. Meanwhile, Kafka and Isao are fighting with each other. Kafka tries calming Kaiju No. 8 down because Kaiju No. 8 has control of their body. He performs some new feats to hold his own against Isao, who is still using weapons made from Kaiju No. 2 to fight Kafka. Keiji informs Kikiru that Isao could have easily killed Kafka during their initial meeting. However, he thinks Isao didn't kill Kafka on the spot because he wanted to test Kafka. Kaguragi and Haruichi are on the rooftop. Kaguragi tells Haruichi he joined the defense force to save lives and didn't expect Kafka to save his life. Haruichi is hesitant to look at Kafka the same way as before. Meanwhile, Kafka and Isao continue their brawl, and Kafka severely injures Isao. Keiji says Kaiju No. 8's fortitude level is slowly increasing. Kafka is concerned that he may kill Isao in front of Kikiru. As Kaiju No. 8 continues to beat Isao down, Kikiru reflects on her promise to kill Kafka if she sees him harming humanity. Kikiru calls out to Kafka, begging him to fight Kaiju No. 8's control. Before Kafka tries, Kaiju No. 8 appears in front of Kafka and swallows him. While swimming inside Kaiju No. 8's stomach, Kafka sees a mirage of Mina. Mina tells him she'll always be waiting for him. This encourages Kafka to regain control over his body seconds before Kaiju No. 8 kills Isao. Kafka strikes himself in the body and tells Isao that he's Kafka Hibino, not Kaiju No. 8. Kafka plummets to the ground. Before Isao's ally, Narumi, kills Kafka, Isao stops Narumi. Isao calls the medics and asks them to take Kaiju No. 8's remnants. He tells the medics that Kaiju No. 8's core is mildly damaged. Isao, Keiji, and Mina meet at the base's conference room. Mina confirms she's known Kafka long before he joined the defense force. However, Mina promises she didn't give Kafka special treatment while he was a defense force member. The higher-ups inform Mina they've made their decision. They state their testimony won't change Kaiju No. 8's fate. Mina says she wants to leave it to the specialists to determine if Kafka is a human or a kaiju. Nonetheless, Mina informs the higher-ups about her experience with Kafka as a defense force officer. She relays details of Kafka's achievements during the Kaiju No. 9 and 10 fights. Mina also delves into Kafka's failures. She argues Kafka's determination and motives to save people make him a worthwhile officer. After Mina recalls a moment between her and Kafka in the past, she tells the higher-ups that Kafka has a huge heart. Although some higher-ups aren't willing to accept that answer, Isao thanks Mina and asks her to return to her post. Before Isao informs the others of Kaiju No. 8's fate, elsewhere, Kafka is inside a water-like tube. He reflects on his mission to make Kaiju pay for causing Mina pain. Moreover, Kafka says he'd rather die as a human if he ever turned into a kaiju. Kafka wakes up in a hospital bed, and Isao is sitting next to him. Isao says he doesn't plan to hurt Kafka. Kafka is glad Isao is alive. He asks Isao if he and the others plan to reinstate him as a defense force officer. Isao tells Kafka that the council argues he is a kaiju. Isao says he convinced the council to let Kafka fight by their side as Kaiju No. 8. In Isao's meeting with the others, he says he knows they can control Kafka. He argues that it's possible a Kaiju No. 8 weapon won't be as useful as the kaiju itself. He shares more credible evidence to let Kafka fight alongside the humans. In the present, Isao asks Kafka to prove his worth to ensure his survival. Kafka is not happy that the council views him as a weapon. He vows to convince Isao and the others that he's a defense force officer like them. Meanwhile, Mina looks at her phone, smiles, and departs from the Ariake maritime base. Kikaru receives a text from Mina informing her that Kafka will be okay. Kikaru vows to get stronger just in case Kafka loses control again. Kaguragi, Aiharu, Rino, and the others receive the same text about Kafka. Hoshina and Okanogi discuss this new intel about Kafka. Hoshina argues they'll need to keep Kafka's kaiju essence under wraps because it'll be bad if outside forces discover they're withholding a kaiju. Meanwhile, in the Monster Sweeper building, a few workers are upset because someone named No. 9 is defeating them at chess. Elsewhere, Kaiju No. 9 reflects on his victories over the humans at chess. Also, he has discovered the increments surrounding the Defense Force's main base. He wants to move forward with his and another ally's plans next phase. Kaiju No. 9 wants to retrieve Kaiju No. 8 from the humans because he says this kaiju belongs to them.